If you're looking to add a ton of fruit to your garden, look no further than a blackberry vine. Not only is this plant so easy to grow, especially in Texas where we have so many native varieties to choose from, but it's also easy to propagate, which means multiply and create many plants from just one. Now, a lot of propagation techniques use cuttings, but I found that propagating a blackberry by using a parent plant is so much more effective and so much easier on you.
Welcome to Homestead Gardening in the Texas Gulf Coast with Kristen Howard. Today's episode is filmed in February and includes updates at the end of this episode to show you how the plants have grown 6 months after propagating and rooting. Propagating blackberry plants is easiest during the dormant period from November through February in Houston, Texas.
Today I'm going to show you how to propagate this vine from a parent plant instead of a cutting. I'm going to show you 3 different ways to turn this parent plant into multiple plants. In order to propagate a blackberry vine correctly, you have to know how it grows. Blackberry vines are going to have 2 types of canes. It's going to have a first-year cane and it's going to have a second-year cane. Second-year canes have been around for about 1 year, and they become woody towards the end of the season in the late fall or winter period, whatever you want to call it, as the plant begins to slow growth and go a little bit dormant. In the spring, a new thing begins to happen. Not only does the original first year cane begin to leaf out and turn into a second year cane, but the vines actually start growing first year canes again. And before the plant even blooms and produces fruit, we have this gorgeous plant growing with new leaves on these original canes from the previous year and putting off huge, giant, gorgeous green canes that are more tender, whereas this is more woody. Now, we are in February, which means those new gorgeous canes that are a little bit more tender are not going to appear for a couple more weeks. But once they appear, we'll have the 2 types of canes on this plant, making propagation a little easier to do now before we start to get confused. So propagation and fruiting is going to happen on this second year cane. So like I mentioned, we have a first year cane that turns into a second year cane. That's what this is. It's a little bit more woody, a little bit more sturdy, and it's where all the action's happening. We are having budding occur on this cane now. We're also going to have flowers and fruit. Now, with propagation, you're always going to be trying to grow roots from a bud location. And this thing is just loaded up every inch to inch and a half. We have buds, which means we have locations where roots can grow. For propagation, you want to have some of these root locations in soil. And if we're propagating off the parent plant, we have all of these options to choose from. And if this vine wasn't snagged somewhere down the line, we probably have 6 to 12 feet of vine that we can work with today. And that's just one section of the vine. This plant has multiple vines coming off of it, multiple arms and canes, if you will. This plant's also very thorny. So we want to have good glove protection, leather gloves, gauntlet gloves, so that we don't get snagged during this process. And I'm even wearing long sleeves just in case. If you're going to be propagating this parent plant using the second year cane and propagating at this specific time of year, which is going to be right before spring, right when the plant starts budding out, there are 2 methods you can use. The first is tip rooting. First thing we're going to do is remove some of the leaves very carefully. And all of these leaf locations are also going to have brand new buds. Anywhere where we have a bud, we can tip root. So I'm just going to take off a little bit more of this end and choose a location where I have a few buds available, and I'm cutting just above this bud. The next thing I'm going to do is bury this in the soil on its side and secure this with a landscape stake, at least in 1 location, but ideally in 2, so that we have 2 to 3 buds underneath the soil, including the tip that we're trying to root. When you're tip rooting, what you're actually doing is growing a plant upside down. But thankfully, once your tip begins to root, you're actually going to be growing that first year growth. And once you remove that piece from the parent plant, all of this second year growth will start to die away, and all that you'll have left is a fresh, new plant.
This tip rooting was extremely successful. Only the tip of this plant was touching the soil for propagation, and you can see the leaves of the plant are still growing in the direction of the stem, which will end up being upside down when the plant is rooted in soil.
We have our propagated blackberry vine with a tip rooting, and we're going to cut a little bit more than I need. We have some really great branching on this plant, and now all I have to do is decide how I want this to look. It seems like the best cut is going to be this straight section. I'll have two good branches. Obviously they're not facing up, and there's a really good chance I'll take that off as well over time, but we'll start out with two branches, see how that goes, and put this into a pot today. All right, so we have our tip-rooted blackberry, and we're going to just very, very carefully work this in without damaging those roots, which is very difficult to do. Thankfully, they're not too big and they're very, very sturdy already. We're gonna carefully place our soil over. And I like to just do like a little tap to make sure that any pore space in between those roots gets a little bit more of the soil in there. And what I'll probably do is trim this off here and just allow this main branch to remain. But I'll water this in today, and if we have any roots exposed tomorrow after watering, I'll top it off with a little bit more soil just until the roots get covered. Another way to propagate this vine is to propagate right in the middle of the cane. Sometimes that's a lot easier if your plant's already rambling along the ground like mine is. And all you have to do with this is find a couple sections with buds, carefully scrape away the surface in between the buds, and bury it in the soil and stake it with landscape stakes again. Now, here's what's going to happen with all of these plants that you're propagating. You are not going to be keeping any of this once the plant propagates. What you're actually trying to propagate is the future growth, next year's growth, first year cane growth. What this is second year cane growth. And because second year canes die after the fruiting period, there is nothing valuable about the rest of this cane. If this dies on you, that does not mean that you did not successfully propagate and get roots from this section that you're trying to root in. What you should be getting is roots and then gorgeous green first year growth coming out of all of these buds, and that's the real goal. After these sections grow roots, you're actually going to cut closer to the parent roots, and you're going to take your section, let's pretend this already has roots, cut it, you're going to have several roots, you're going to pot it. If any of these buds are healthy and green, you will keep them. Otherwise, you should have fresh new leafy growth coming in, and you can cut off anything that's dead and let everything else new grow. Another easy way to propagate blackberries is through midsection rooting on the nodes. And each node of a blackberry plant has potential to root. And here's a node that hasn't rooted, but then this node did. So this node basically just didn't get covered completely by soil or some sort of matter to keep the area moist and encourage the roots to be produced from the node, but we have incredible rooting on this stem. And you can see where a piece was either rooted in completely and broke off on accident, or it continued and obviously broke off, but each one of these nodes just has beautiful roots. So what we can do is bury this entire section of roots and choose an area higher up the stem to trim as the top of our plant. So what I'll do is have a really large planter for this and probably have more shallow soil, maybe only 4 inches below, and then a few inches on top. Let these roots really propagate and look and fantastic, fill that soil area, and then transplant based on how it's doing. But we always want more root growth than we want top growth, so we're not going to take more than a few branch leaf sections. We have 2 really nice ones here, so we'll only take that and make our cut about right there. This is the stem from last year. This is 2nd year growth. It's very, very woody. And here is the new growth coming from the root system. This is 1st year growth. You can see how much greener it is, how much more bendy and tender that is. That's the difference between 1st year growth and 2nd year growth. And the reason why I'm able to show you this when I can't show this to you any other location is that this has been growing in the greenhouse. So it's already very accustomed to the warmer climate and was able to put out this growth much earlier. This does have a chance to fruit. There's not a lot of stem to do that on, but there is a chance. But this will all die back at the end of the year while this continues to grow. And this will all turn into 2nd year growth by next year and should be a pretty long cane. So what I'm going to want to do with this is actually transplant it pretty soon and make sure that it gets all the opportunity to grow a giant cane this year. The 3rd propagation technique happens from the root system of the blackberry itself. This blackberry patch actually has an expansive root system underneath the soil, and it will pop up brand new baby plants, brand new growth attached to the parent root system all over this patch in about a month. So in March, new baby plants will pop up, and their root system and their livelihood is 100% dependent upon that parent plant. You can absolutely take that plant now, as long as you have a lot of the parent root system coming with it, and baby that plant for a couple months to make sure that it can grow very, very strong. Sometimes that plant will actually die from the top and put on new growth from the roots. As long as you have a good root system in that pot that you're transplanting, that propagated section will still come back for you and will turn into a new plant. Alternatively, you can wait a little bit longer, about 6 months, and take that plant in September or October. So all you have to do is mark which baby plants that you're wanting in spring when they're bright green and it's really easy to identify the tender growth, and wait 6 months until all of these stems turn a little bit woodier and they have more of their own root system and are less dependent on the parent at that point. Then you can easily dig them up, and you only have to worry about transplant shock for about a week's time. Now, if you're very, very warm still in September and October, make sure you're doing this activity very early in the morning to reduce that transplant shock. You can usually get a plant through transplant shock with correct digging methods in just a matter of 1 or 2 days, but sometimes that will take a week.
Transplanting blackberry suckers in the dormant period is easy. You can see I used this shovel to carry as much of the native soil and roots as possible from the blackberry patch to the new planting location, and then carefully covered the roots with new soil. Potting blackberry suckers is also easy. You can see how I prune off most of the vine before digging it up. I add native soil to the roots after potting, water the plant well, and prune a few more leaves before taking this pot to the greenhouse.
I planted the blackberry about 6 months ago, and now this cane is about 42 inches tall, And a lot of this blackberry plant is looking amazing. There are several more canes growing right now in the garden. Seriously, these planes are so incredibly close. Oh, this one's passing over me. It is a FedEx plane. It's so low. I mean, maybe I just updated my contact prescription and my vision's fantastic, but I can read every single thing on that plane because it's so stinking close.